Officer Emily Harper was leaving the station when she heard a faint crying near the door. She opened it and froze. In a basket lay a black baby with different colored eyes, one blue, the other brown. Emily instantly knew her life would never be the same. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to find out what she did next. The quiet hum of the station's fluorescent lights was the only sound as Officer Emily Harper gathered her belongings, preparing to end her shift. It had been an uneventful day, just routine paperwork and the occasional radio chatter. She glanced at the clock on the wall, eager to return home for a quiet evening. But as she approached the front door, something unusual caught her attention. A faint, almost imperceptible cry drifted through the heavy door. Emily paused, her heart skipping a beat. It was late, the streets outside usually empty at this hour. She listened carefully, the sound growing clearer, a soft, pitiful wail, fragile and desperate. Her instincts kicked in as she quickly unlatched the door and stepped outside. The cool night air hit her face, but it was the sight before her that sent a shiver down her spine. On the top step of the station, illuminated by the glow of the street lamp, sat a small basket. Emily's breath caught as she leaned down, her hands trembling slightly. Inside the basket lay a tiny baby, bundled in a thin, warm blanket. The infant's skin was smooth and dark, her tiny hands curled into delicate fists. Emily's gaze was drawn to the baby's eyes as they fluttered open. One was a striking shade of deep brown, warm and rich like the earth. The other was an almost surreal, piercing blue, like the sky on a clear winter morning. The contrast was startling, mesmerizing even, and Emily felt a strange pang in her chest. For a moment, she was frozen, her mind racing. Who could have left a baby here, of all places? Why? She looked around, scanning the empty street for any sign of the person who had abandoned the child, but there was no one. Just the quiet rustle of leaves in the wind and the soft, steady cries of the baby in her arms. Emily crouched down, her voice soft and steady as she spoke. "Hey, little one," she murmured, gently adjusting the blanket to cover the baby's exposed arm. "What are you doing out here all alone?" The baby quieted slightly at the sound of her voice, her mismatched eyes locking onto Emily's. It was as if the child could sense something in her, a calm reassurance amidst the chaos of the moment. Emily felt her throat tighten, a wave of emotions crashing over her, concern, anger at whoever had left this innocent life on the cold steps, and a deep, inexplicable connection she couldn't yet understand. She carefully lifted the basket and carried it inside, her mind already racing through the possibilities. This wasn't just an abandoned child, this was something bigger, something she couldn't yet grasp. Emily knew, with absolute certainty, that her life was about to change forever. Back inside the station, Emily carefully placed the basket on her desk, her mind racing with questions. The baby girl, now quieter but still restless, looked up at her with those strikingly different eyes. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just an ordinary abandonment. Someone had left this child deliberately, choosing the police station as the drop-off point. But why? And who? She reached for her radio and called for backup. Within minutes, a social services representative arrived, clipboard in hand, their expression already betraying a sense of impatience. Emily explained the situation, pointing to the baby who was now dozing in the basket, her tiny chest rising and falling softly. The representative sighed, flipping through forms. "We'll take her to the nearest shelter," they said with a detached tone. Standard procedure. Emily felt a flash of frustration. A shelter? Shouldn't we try to find her family first? Someone must know where she came from. The representative shrugged. With no identification, no note, and no witnesses, it's unlikely we'll find anything. This happens more often than you think. The nonchalance in their voice made Emily's stomach turn. She looked back at the baby, who now seemed impossibly small and vulnerable in the harsh fluorescent light of the station. "That's not good enough," Emily said firmly. "There has to be a way to figure this out. Someone didn't just leave her here without a reason." Determined to dig deeper, Emily decided to investigate on her own. She combed through surveillance footage from the street outside the station, hoping to catch a glimpse of who had left the basket. The footage revealed nothing but shadows and the faint outline of someone walking away, too blurry to identify. She began making calls to local hospitals, asking if any babies matching the girl's description had been born recently. Each call ended in the same way: polite refusals or endless transfers that led nowhere. The walls of bureaucracy were as impenetrable as ever, and Emily couldn't help but feel a growing sense of anger, not just at the system, but at the way society seemed so ready to turn a blind eye to the most vulnerable. Even her colleagues weren't much help. Some offered supportive comments, but others muttered under their breath about how cases like this weren't worth the effort. One officer even joked, "Maybe she'll grow up and thank us for the basket." Emily's jaw tightened. She knew these were the kinds of quiet prejudices that festered beneath the surface, the kind that could shape a child's entire future. But she wasn't about to let indifference dictate this baby's fate. As the hours ticked by, Emily found herself more determined than ever. She didn't just want to solve the mystery, she felt an obligation to this child, who had been abandoned yet still deserved a chance at a better life. Staring into the baby's mismatched eyes, Emily silently promised herself that she wouldn't stop until she uncovered the truth. As the baby girl's quiet coos echoed softly through the station, Emily found herself under the watchful eyes of her colleagues. The initial curiosity about the baby had shifted into something heavier, something unspoken yet palpable. The murmurs began subtly, like a low hum of discomfort that quickly grew louder in the form of probing questions and sidelong glances. During a coffee break, one officer leaned against the counter, stirring his cup absent-mindedly. "So, Emily," he started casually, but there was a sharp edge to his tone, "what's the plan with your little visitor? You're not seriously thinking of getting too involved, are you?" Emily straightened her back. "I'm doing my job," she replied evenly. "Finding out who she is and where she belongs." Another officer chimed in, chuckling. "She doesn't belong here, that's for sure. You've got your hands full already, Harper. Maybe let the system handle this one." The words hit harder than she expected, not because they doubted her, but because of the veiled message behind them. Emily glanced at the baby, who was now sleeping peacefully in the basket on her desk, her tiny hands curled into fists. It wasn't just the workload they were questioning, it was the girl herself. The color of her skin, the fact that she was different, had made her a subject of judgment before she even had a chance to speak her first words. One officer, a younger recruit trying to fit in, muttered just loud enough to be heard, "It's not like she's your responsibility, right? I mean, there's probably a reason she was left behind." Emily's hands tightened into fists, her knuckles whitening. The implication hung in the air like a dark cloud. She could feel their eyes on her, testing her reaction, waiting to see if she would take the bait. "What exactly are you trying to say?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. The room grew quiet, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. No one answered directly, but the smirks and averted gazes told her everything she needed to know. It wasn't just about the baby. It was about the deeply rooted prejudices that so many of them carried, prejudices they might not even acknowledge openly but that seeped into moments like these. Emily felt the weight of it pressing against her chest, but she refused to let it break her resolve. Later, as she sat at her desk, one of the few colleagues she trusted, Officer Daniels, approached her quietly. "You know they're just scared of what they don't understand," he said, pulling up a chair. "They see something different, and it threatens their sense of control." Emily nodded, appreciating his words but still feeling the sting of the earlier comments. It's not about control, she said. It's about humanity. That little girl didn't ask to be left here. And she sure as hell doesn't deserve to be judged for it. Daniel smiled faintly. You're right. But not everyone sees it that way. You're going to face a lot more of this if you decide to keep fighting for her. Emily looked at the baby again, her mismatched eyes closed in peaceful slumber. She thought about how easily someone could dismiss a life simply because it didn't fit their narrow worldview. The thought made her stomach turn. I'm not afraid of a fight, she said softly but with conviction. If she's already facing this much judgment at her age, then someone needs to stand up for her. And I will. As the baby stirred slightly in her basket, Emily made a silent vow. She wouldn't let the ignorance of others dictate this child's future. No matter how uncomfortable it made her colleagues or how much resistance she faced, Emily knew she had to be the voice that this little girl couldn't yet have for herself. The baby girl's mismatched eyes, one a striking blue, the other a rich brown, were captivating, almost otherworldly. But what Emily saw as a beautiful uniqueness quickly became a point of discomfort for others at the station. It wasn't long before quiet whispers turned into pointed comments, the kind that revealed far more about the people speaking than about the innocent child in the basket. She looks unusual, doesn't she? One officer remarked, staring at the baby with a mix of curiosity and unease. I mean, those eyes. It's like something out of a movie. Another officer, standing nearby, chimed in with a nervous chuckle. Yeah, they're kind of unsettling, aren't they? Almost like she's watching you in two different ways. Emily, overhearing their conversation, felt a pang of frustration. She's just a baby, she said firmly, stepping into the room. Her tone made them pause, but only briefly. Of course, Harper, the first officer said, holding up his hands defensively. I didn't mean anything by it. It's just, you have to admit, it's not something you see every day. Emily bit back her response, knowing that arguing would only make her seem defensive. Instead, she turned her attention back to the baby, who was beginning to stir in her basket. Her tiny hands reached up, and for a moment, her eyes opened, one blue, one brown. To Emily, they were a reminder of how incredible life could be, how differences made the world richer. To others, it seemed, they were just another excuse to project their fears and biases. The murmurs didn't stop there. Some officers speculated about the girl's background, their assumptions steeped in stereotypes. You think she's mixed? Probably why she got left behind, one muttered, not realizing, or perhaps not caring, that Emily could hear. It was as though the baby's eyes had become a mirror, reflecting the prejudices of those around her. Emily noticed how even the simplest gestures, offering to hold the baby, talking about what might happen to her, were tinged with discomfort or avoidance. It was as if the child's uniqueness made her a symbol of something they couldn't, or wouldn't, accept. One day, as Emily carried the baby through the station to meet a social worker, she caught sight of a group of officers watching her. Their expressions ranged from pity to disapproval, and one of them whispered loud enough for her to hear, "Harper's getting too attached. She'll regret it." Emily stopped in her tracks and turned to face them. "If caring about a child makes me too attached," she said evenly, "then maybe more of us should be." The room fell silent, but the weight of their stares lingered as she walked away. It wasn't just the baby's eyes they were uncomfortable with, it was what those eyes represented. A challenge to their narrow worldview, a reminder that life didn't fit neatly into their preconceived notions. Back at her desk, Emily looked down at the baby, who was now sleeping peacefully in her basket. Those mismatched eyes, so striking and full of potential, had already become a lightning rod for prejudice and fear. But to Emily, they were a symbol of resilience, a reminder that differences weren't something to fear but to celebrate. She leaned over and gently adjusted the blanket around the baby. "They don't see it yet," she whispered. "But you're going to show them just how beautiful different can be." Emily couldn't shake the question swirling in her mind about the baby's past. Who was her mother? What had led her to abandon such a precious child on the steps of a police station? The more she thought about it, the more determined she became to uncover the truth. She knew the baby's story had to start somewhere, and she was determined to piece it together. Her investigation began with the basket itself. It was simple, unremarkable, but lined with a neatly folded blanket. Tucked beneath the blanket was a small note written in hurried, shaky handwriting. "I'm sorry. I had no choice. Please take care of her." The words were haunting in their brevity, filled with anguish and desperation. Emily could almost hear the pain in each letter, as though the writer had been forced to make an unbearable decision. The note became her first clue. Emily had the handwriting analyzed, hoping it would provide some lead. Meanwhile, she started calling local shelters and hospitals, asking if they had recently encountered a woman who might match the profile of the baby's mother. The responses were frustratingly similar. "We don't have any information," or worse, "We don't get involved in cases like that." But Emily refused to give up. Days of digging finally led her to a nearby community clinic. A nurse there recalled a young black woman who had come in a few months earlier, heavily pregnant and clearly distraught. She had refused to give her name, but the nurse remembered her striking mismatched eyes, just like the baby's. Emily's heart sank as she imagined the struggles this woman must have faced. Further inquiries revealed fragments of her story. The mother had moved to the area seeking a fresh start but was met with the same barriers she had faced all her life: discrimination, isolation, and judgment. Landlords refused to rent to her, employers overlooked her, and even neighbors avoided her. The constant rejection wore her down, leaving her with nowhere to turn. One detail hit Emily particularly hard: the woman had been seen crying outside a local shelter after being turned away. She had begged for a place to stay, but there was no room, and she didn't have the resources to look elsewhere. Emily could only imagine the despair that must have consumed her as she carried her unborn child, knowing she had no stable home to bring her into. The final piece of the puzzle came from a woman who worked at a second-hand shop. She remembered the mother coming in a few days before the baby was left at the station. "She bought a basket and a blanket," the woman said quietly. She looked broken, like she had already decided what she was going to do. Emily sat with this information, her heart heavy. The story painted a picture of a mother who had loved her child enough to let her go, hoping that someone else might give her the life she couldn't. It was a story of survival, but also of a society that had failed one of its most vulnerable members. The weight of it all pressed down on Emily, fueling her resolve. As she looked down at the baby sleeping peacefully in her basket, Emily whispered, "Your mother loved you more than you'll ever know. And I promise, I won't let her sacrifice be in vain." The decision weighed on Emily's mind like a storm cloud that wouldn't lift. She had spent sleepless nights thinking about the baby girl and the fragments of her mother's heartbreaking story. The system was supposed to step in, to provide safety and care for children like her. But Emily had seen too much, too many children slipping through the cracks, too many lives lost to neglect and indifference. She couldn't let that happen here. The baby's mismatched eyes, so full of innocence and fragility, seemed to follow Emily wherever she went. Every glance reminded her of the unspoken promise she had made that night on the station steps. This child deserved more than just survival. She deserved love, stability, and a chance to thrive. But Emily knew the decision wouldn't come without consequences. Her colleagues had already started to whisper, their skepticism apparent in their side glances and hushed conversations. "She's too attached," someone had murmured in the break room. "This is going to mess with her career," another added. Even her supervisor, normally supportive, had sat her down for a gentle talk. "Harper, I get it," he began, his tone measured. You have a big heart. But taking on this responsibility? It's not just about you. You're a cop, not a social worker. Are you sure you're ready for what this means? Emily had stared at him, her jaw tight. She didn't respond immediately because deep down, she knew he was right, it wasn't going to be easy. But then she thought about the girl's tiny hands clutching the blanket, about the note that begged for someone to care, and she knew her answer. I am, she said finally, her voice steady. If not me, then who? The day she made her decision, Emily took a deep breath and filed the necessary paperwork to begin the process of fostering the baby. It was just the first step, but it felt monumental. As she handed the forms to the caseworker, she felt a strange mix of fear and determination. You're really going through with this? The caseworker asked, raising an eyebrow. You know this isn't going to be a walk in the park, right? Emily nodded. I'm not expecting it to be easy. But she deserves a chance, and I'm not going to stand by and let the system fail her. That evening, Emily returned to the station and picked up the baby, who looked up at her with those incredible, mismatched eyes. For the first time, she allowed herself to smile. You're coming home with me, she whispered, cradling the baby in her arms. We'll figure this out together. Driving home, Emily couldn't help but think about the journey ahead. There would be challenges, questions from friends and family, resistance from the community, and the ever-present voice of doubt in her own mind. But as she glanced at the baby in the rearview mirror, peacefully asleep, she knew she had made the right choice. This wasn't just about giving the baby a home. It was about proving that love and humanity could rise above prejudice and bureaucracy. It was about showing the world, and herself, that one person's bravery could make all the difference. As news of Emily's decision spread through the small town, whispers turned into pointed conversations. The tight-knit community, known for its traditional values and cautious nature, wasn't ready for the story of a white police officer taking in a black baby with mismatched eyes. At first, Emily thought the occasional raised eyebrow or hesitant question was the extent of it. But soon, the disapproval became impossible to ignore. In the grocery store, she overheard two women by the produce aisle, their voices low but not low enough. Did you hear about Officer Harper? One asked, her tone dripping with incredulity. Taking in that baby. I don't know what she's thinking. The other woman shook her head, glancing over her shoulder as if Emily might appear at any moment. It's not natural. She's just setting herself up for trouble. Poor thing doesn't know what she's getting into. At work, it wasn't much better. Her colleagues, once friendly and supportive, now seemed distant. Conversations would halt when she entered the room, and some officers avoided her altogether. One afternoon, during a lunch break, she caught the tail end of a hushed discussion. She's only doing this for attention, a younger officer muttered, stabbing at his sandwich with unnecessary force. You know how these things go. She's trying to be a hero. Emily's chest tightened, but she held her head high and walked past them without a word. She had no intention of justifying her decision to anyone who couldn't see beyond their own biases. Still, the weight of the judgment began to settle on her shoulders, heavier than she'd anticipated. Even in the community, the backlash was relentless. People questioned her motives, her judgment, and even her ability to be a good parent. Some framed their criticisms as concern, masking their prejudice with a thin veneer of politeness. Emily, I'm just worried about you, said a neighbor one morning as she walked to her car. Raising a child, it's a lot, especially one with, well, such a different background. Are you sure you know what you're doing? The undertone was clear, asterisk, why would you want to raise her? She's not like you, asterisk. Emily kept her composure, though her fists clenched at her sides. What I know, she replied evenly, is that she deserves love and safety. And I'm going to give her that. But the most painful resistance came from people Emily had considered friends. One evening, she met a longtime acquaintance for coffee, hoping for a moment of support in the midst of the chaos. Instead, the conversation quickly turned cold. "I just don't get it," her friend said, shaking her head. "There are so many kids who need help. Why this one? Why go out of your way for a baby that's not even yours?" Emily's voice was calm but firm as she replied, "Because she needs someone. And if it can't be her own family, then it will be me." Despite the negativity, Emily found unexpected allies. A few community members reached out quietly, offering kind words and encouragement. One elderly woman stopped her on the street and placed a gentle hand on her arm. "You're doing something beautiful," she said softly. "Don't let the small-mindedness of others stop you." Emily smiled, her resolve strengthened by the woman's words. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she also knew that she wasn't alone. For every voice of doubt, there was a voice of hope, even if it was faint. At home, as Emily watched the baby sleep in her crib, she felt the sting of society's judgment fade into the background. The child's peaceful expression reminded her why she had made this decision in the first place. This wasn't about proving a point or seeking approval, it was about love, humanity, and giving a little girl the chance she deserved. Emily whispered to herself, "Let them judge. I know what's right." The first few weeks were challenging in ways Emily hadn't anticipated. The baby, still adjusting to her new environment, cried often, her mismatched eyes searching the room as if trying to make sense of the world around her. Emily, who had faced life-threatening situations on the job, found herself pacing the living room at 3 a.m., humming lullabies she hadn't sung since childhood. The quiet hours of the night became a time for both of them to navigate their uncharted journey together. Emily named the baby Maya, inspired by the resilience she saw in the tiny girl who had already endured so much. Slowly, they began to find a rhythm. Feeding times became moments of connection, as Maya's small hand would reach out to grasp Emily's finger. Those tiny gestures felt like a bridge between them, a silent assurance that they were starting to trust each other. But the road wasn't without its struggles. Emily often doubted herself. Every cry Maya let out felt like a test she wasn't sure she was passing. Some nights, she would sit by the crib, watching Maya sleep, and wonder if she was truly equipped to be a mother. Yet, every time doubt crept in, Maya would flash her a small, toothless smile in the morning, as if to say, "You're doing fine." One evening, as Emily prepared a bottle, she noticed something extraordinary. Maya had stopped crying and was watching her intently from her bouncer, her two distinct eyes following Emily's every move. It was the first time Emily felt truly seen, not as a police officer, not as a woman facing societal judgment, but simply as someone Maya trusted. As weeks turned into months, their bond deepened. Maya's laughter became Emily's favorite sound, filling the once quiet house with warmth. Emily found herself decorating the nursery with colors and patterns she thought Maya would love, each choice reflecting her growing commitment to this little girl. The milestones came quickly. Maya's first time reaching out for Emily's face left her in tears. Her first hesitant giggle after Emily played peekaboo turned into full-blown laughter that echoed through the house. Emily began documenting every moment, her phone filled with pictures and videos of Maya's tiny triumphs. But it wasn't just Maya who was changing. Emily noticed how much lighter she felt, how the small moments of joy with Maya began to outweigh the pressures and judgment from the outside world. She found herself smiling more, laughing at things that once seemed insignificant. Maya's presence was transforming Emily's life, peeling away layers of doubt and replacing them with a sense of purpose she hadn't realized she was missing. One afternoon, Emily took Maya to the park. As they sat on a bench, the autumn leaves swirling around them, Maya reached up to grab a leaf that had landed on Emily's shoulder. Emily laughed, the sound unguarded and free, and for the first time in years, she felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Maya wasn't just a child she was caring for, she was family. She was a reminder that love could grow in the unlikeliest of circumstances, that it could overcome the sharpest judgments and the deepest fears. Emily realized she wasn't just building a bond with Maya, she was building a life. That night, as Emily rocked Maya to sleep, she whispered softly, "You've changed everything, little one. And I wouldn't have it any other way." The story of Emily and Maya began to ripple through the small town and beyond, sparking conversations in coffee shops, on social media, and even at town hall meetings. What had started as a quiet decision by a police officer to take in an abandoned baby had turned into something much bigger, a challenge to the deeply ingrained prejudices that many prefer to ignore. Emily hadn't planned to become an advocate. Her sole focus had been giving Maya the safe and loving home she deserved. But as the story spread, people began to approach her. Some wanted to offer their support, others were simply curious, and a few were openly critical, questioning her motives or even her ability to raise a child so different from herself. One day, Emily was invited to speak at a local community center. Initially hesitant, she realized this was an opportunity to share Maya's story and the lessons she had learned. Standing in front of a small crowd, she began to recount the night she found Maya, her voice steady but full of emotion. She was just a baby, Emily said, her eyes scanning the audience. Left on the steps of a police station with no one to care for her. And yet, even as a newborn, she became a target of prejudice, her unique eyes, her skin color, the assumptions people made about her before she could even speak. The room was silent, the weight of her words settling heavily over the audience. Emily continued, sharing the challenges she had faced, not just the sleepless nights and the doubts of parenthood, but the resistance from her own community. "I've seen firsthand how prejudice warps our view of one another," she said. "How it makes us blind to the beauty of diversity, to the strength in our differences. But what I've also learned is that love and humanity have the power to break through those barriers." The crowd erupted in applause, but Emily wasn't finished. She used the platform to call for action, urging people to look inward and question their own biases. She highlighted the need for systemic changes, from education to law enforcement, to ensure that children like Maya wouldn't have to grow up in a world where their worth was questioned because of their skin color. The story gained traction online, with videos of her speech circulating widely. People from all walks of life reached out, sharing their own experiences with discrimination or offering words of encouragement. But not all the feedback was positive. Critics accused Emily of using Maya's story for attention or of overstepping her role as a police officer. Emily faced the backlash with the same determination that had guided her from the start. "This isn't about me," she told a local journalist during an interview. "This is about challenging a society that still struggles to see people for who they are, rather than what they look like." As the months passed, Emily began collaborating with local organizations to promote diversity and inclusion. She worked with schools to create programs that celebrated cultural differences and spoke at events aimed at fostering dialogue between communities. Maya often accompanied her, becoming a symbol of hope and resilience. Through it all, Emily stayed grounded in her mission, to ensure that Maya, and every child, could grow up in a world that valued them for their uniqueness. She knew the journey was far from over, but she also knew that every step forward mattered. One evening, as she tucked Maya into bed, Emily reflected on how far they had come. The girl with mismatched eyes had not only changed her life but had sparked a movement that was making others question their own prejudices. Stroking Maya's cheek, she whispered, "You're changing the world, little one. Just by being you." Emily and Maya became a family, defying every challenge that had come their way. What began as a single act of compassion turned into a journey of resilience and hope. Over time, Emily watched Maya grow, her mismatched eyes sparkling with curiosity and joy. The barriers they faced, judgment, prejudice, and doubt, only strengthened their bond. Their story resonated far beyond their small town. People who had once doubted Emily's decision now admired her courage, while Maya's radiant smile became a symbol of the power of love to transcend all differences. The community, once hesitant, began to change, inspired by the undeniable strength of their unique family. As Emily watched Maya take her first steps, then speak her first words, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Their journey wasn't just about surviving, it was about thriving, proving that humanity's capacity for kindness can overcome even the strongest barriers. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories that remind us of the incredible strength of love and compassion.